Hey, this is Mark Taylor, editor of Christian Standard Magazine and publisher of Christian Standard Media, talking to some folks at the 2016 North American Christian Convention in Anaheim. Some folks are helping make it happen. And this afternoon we're talking to Brian Mavis, who's the president of America's Kids Belong. President and founder of America's Kids Belong.
Yeah.
How long has this thing been going on? Not very long.
Not long. We officially launched last May, so 14 months ago.
And in a nutshell, give us your mission statement or what America's Kids Belong is achieving.
Yeah, the mission statement is to end the foster care crisis in the United States. Every state is failing, essentially, in the next 10 years. And doing that by getting key churches and key government officials and key business people and key creatives all working together to solve the problem.
Brian wrote an article for Christian Standard, a magazine that's going to appear soon, that talks about wrestling elephants. And I think you've just named the elephants, but why are they elephants?
Yeah, people have asked me what I do, and I tell them I'm an elephant trainer, and they get all excited about that until I tell them that's just a metaphor.
You kind of look like you could be an elephant trainer.
Yeah, I have a top hat. And so where that came from is a child welfare worker in Texas. I was talking with her, and she said, there's an African proverb that says, when elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. And then she went on to elaborate, saying, the state and government has got to quit fighting with the church because only the kids are the ones who are suffering for it. And so what I do is get the people of influence. I try to do high influence, high character people in the state. So the governors, church leaders, business leaders, and creative leaders to say, let's work together for the first time for the sake of the kids in foster care.
Yeah, so why is that so hard, or is it that hard?
It is, yeah, it's very hard. It's never been done, as far as I know. One is elephants don't like to work together, or they all want to be the lead elephant.
Yeah.
But it's difficult because these kids have experienced loss and trauma. The government has to be involved. They're the state's custodian of these kids. And so it requires working with the government system, and sometimes that can be challenging, and sometimes it's challenging to work with the church, and the business community sometimes wonders, like, why do we need to care about this? And the creative people are like, is there a handle that we can crank? I mean, we want to help, but we don't know how. So we help put those pieces together.
And part of it is because you think these entities, in each instance for a different reason, is really just sort of self-interest. It's their own self-interest, their own budgets, their own time, their own agendas that distracts them from this cooperative larger agenda? Yeah,
but when they hear about I think the main thing is that they just don't know about these kids. If you were to ask somebody, are there orphans in America, they would be like, well, one, I've never thought of that. Two, I've never heard of one. And so then when you talk about foster care, and you explain why kids are in foster care, and then connect that to orphanages worldwide, 80% of orphans have a living parent in the world. But they're in orphanages for the same reasons kids are in foster care. Parents are addicts, in prison, have mental health issues, have abused the child, have severe neglect. And so it's the same kids. We don't call them orphans. We call them kids in foster care. But if you were to go to another country, you would see the same kinds of kids there. So when you wake people up to that issue, they do want to help, they just don't know how. And so we do give them a handle to crank.
And the government really can't handle it by itself.
Oh, they're overwhelmed. There is a crisis. Every state has a crisis on their hands. And really where this came from 9 years ago was a child welfare worker told me that in 26-year history of child welfare in Boulder County, there had never been a day where kids weren't waiting to be helped by the grown-ups. And she said, I just have a challenge for you in your church. And I was at LifeBridge.
In Longmont, Colorado.
Longmont, Colorado. And LifeBridge has always been great at not asking about how does this help us. But she said, I have a challenge. help me change who waits. I want there to be so many grown-ups that care about these kids that are on the waiting list. So that we helped fulfill that in a year's time, and it then helped move beyond our county towards the state and now other states.
But you weren't really training elephants to achieve that. Do you feel like you were? It was kind of just government and church working together.
At that time was, working, serving the government, and it was using the creative elements of photography and videography and then showing in the church. But we did realize that there were some challenges within the government that we hadn't gotten to the power people yet. And I joined forces with the former Secretary of State of Virginia, who's interested in this issue, is also an adoptive mom, and did a campaign with the governor there. And we joined forces, and they refer to themselves as grass tops. That's how they it's typical of them. And so I said, wait, we were all grassroots. You were grass tops. Let's come together and get all these people to come together for the sake of these kids. And it's been well received.
So from Colorado to Virginia.
Yeah.
And where else so far?
Well, we met with dozens of governors and chiefs of staff who all expressed levels of interest, and we decided to work in Oklahoma with Governor Mary Fallon and the child welfare there. They have been tremendous, they're incredible. And then some of the churches have stepped up in major ways, and what's happened there has been unprecedented in Oklahoma, and it was so many people coming together. They, in the last 7 months, have recruited nearly just over 1,000 new families. And again, it's because the churches have stepped up and the communities come together. It's been remarkable. We've seen other pockets of stuff happening in other states. We're starting to work in Tennessee, and we've gotten interest from at least a dozen other states.
I don't think I've ever heard a plea on behalf of foster children in church in my whole decades of going to church.
Yeah.
Which is not unusual, I guess.
Yeah, I think the church outsourced care to the state, and I think God is rousing the church to this again. You know, it is interesting. James 1:27 talks about pure and faultless religion, and one of its expression is taking care of orphans. And I think he's hearkening back to Isaiah 1, where God is saying, I'm tired of your sacrifices. I want you to care about justice, to care for the fatherless. And so James isn't saying, here's the comprehensive expression of worship, but he is saying, here's the essential expression of worship. And it's caring about the vulnerable. And there is no person more vulnerable than a child without a family. Kids in foster care also are a gateway to all sorts of other issues that churches deal with: homelessness, addiction, crisis pregnancy, jail time, sex trafficking. All those kids who never do get taken care of and age out, they become one of those things.
So there's the Christian motivation. I'm sure you anticipate that question with your presentation. The Christian motivation is in James and Isaiah and so forth.
Yeah, it's. I think it's one of the, again, more pure expressions or reflections of the gospel. There's essentially two goals in foster care. The first goal is reunification to the child's family. And that happens for about 3/4 of the families.
Really?
3/4 of the kids. And so it's a beautiful work of reconciliation. But for 1/4 of those kids, that goal doesn't get realized, and they need a new forever family. And it's a reflection of adoption. It's a real adoption, reflecting that us as well being adopted by God. So it's not a social movement, it's a spiritual movement with a social impact.
And it's a motive simply to care for the vulnerable, not really to baptize people, count conversions, grow the church?
No,
et cetera?
so we're doing this because we're Christians, not to make Christians. Now, that would be our hope, that these kids would come to know the love of Christ, but we're motivated out of love and out of our obedience.
So, anybody who hears you talk about this or talks to you one face-to-face about it perceives some real passion on your part about this calling. Now, is that because you're just passionate about whatever you're giving yourself to at the moment? That may be part of it.
No, I'm not. I am one of the more apathetic people you've ever met.
You heard it here, folks.
No, it's almost true. I mean, I'm interested in lots of things, but it's the God things that captivate my imagination. And it was, one, feeling a personal call to this. In fact, I resisted it. I was a foster parent and all that. And when I was challenged to help essentially with this national movement, I said no. And it was God who got my attention through several events that happened, but finally my own words convicted me when I said, my thing is not to get kids into homes, my thing is to lead people to Christ. And then I kept talking and I said, but wouldn't it be amazing if the people I led to Christ were kids who needed families? And then it clicked. God had not changed my what, He had changed my how.
Well, we're excited about it. You're an example to us. We're going to be watching the news. Once this catches on in several states, I think we will hear about it nationally.
Well, I hope so. And again, I said one of the ways I want to express it to church leaders is when people think of the church and they think about prayer and they think about preaching and they think about singing and they think about maybe communion, I want someday to people to think about, when they think about foster care in the church, they're going to say, well, of course that they go together. When haven't they never done? And I'll like, well, 10 years ago, it wasn't the case. I want people to say 10 years from now, when they think of foster care, they think of the church and vice versa.
I think it's going to happen, Brian.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.